Welcome back to Activism is Medicine. My name is Frank Forensic, and today we'd like to welcome to our show Justin McAffee. Justin has some exciting ideas to share about bioregionalism and what he calls the collapse curriculum. I hope you enjoy it. Wonderful. Well, welcome to our show. We're so pleased to have you, Justin. And we often start with an origin story, and feel free to reach back as far as you want. I'm interested in people's childhoods and how they came to form a bond or a relationship with nature, and then what kind of journey that leads people on. So feel free to dive in, and then of course we'll go into bioregionalism and the crisis curriculum, and also I'm curious about your experience in politics and what you might have learned along the way too. So feel free to jump in.
Sounds good. Yeah, if you go back a few 100 million years, there was this stuff that started to create life on the planet, which is really interesting. And it's interesting. I think that's a good place to start because I view all the life that that's our ancestors, right? So we're related. Everything on this planet is related genetically. We're it's a big family, and most people do not look at life on the planet as a family. Like, we used to be fish. Like, our great 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 granddaddy and grandmammy were fish, and we came out of the oceans. And so anyway, not to go too much onto that, but just I think that's a paradigm shift that I've had in my life, is looking at it's not just a plant that I consume, or a chicken that lays eggs for me to eat. It's we're a big family, and it's more than just commodities and things like that. But just to go back only a few years, it's interesting. My name is Justin, right? My dad named me Justin because he was graduating from law school. I know two of you at least are lawyers. I don't know if everyone is, but no, you okay. He named me Justin because it means justice. So that may have started me off on I don't know, a name is important. I've always thought about that. My name is Justin because I was born because my dad was graduating from law school. He clerked for a federal judge in the Ninth Circuit, and then he became a law professor. He did practice a little bit, did not like that as much, but he was a professor of constitutional law for 40 years. He's retired now, and he wrote a lot about different issues related to free speech, separation of church and state, freedom of religion, search and seizures, and his big claim to fame was actually written about the Ninth Amendment, which was an article he published at Columbia Law Review. So anyway, growing up around the dinner table, we were talking about, like, he was a philosophy major in his undergraduate work, and so I just grew up immersed in philosophical thought, legal thought, and government thought, thinking about how society forms, and talking about John Locke and social contract theories and stuff like this, So that was, I remember, like, I was in a government class, and I think the subject of the amendments came up, and we were talking about the Third Amendment. Does anyone here know what the Third Amendment is?
No.
Almost no one can name it because it's rarely talked about or used, because it's about the quartering of soldiers. Probably heard of that.
Yeah.
The government's not allowed to quarter soldiers in your house. But I knew that, and I remember the government teacher was pretty stinking impressed by that. It's just a funny story, but I think that's where I'm coming from. I also grew up religious and went to Boy Scouts, and I'm kind of a Boy Scout kind of guy, I think, in a way. Uh, and I've always loved the outdoors and stuff like that. I found my own I kind of went away from organized religion and just found my own kind of nature-based spirituality over time. But it was a good foundation, I think, just to think about those kinds of things beyond just the logical, the scientific. I think there's more to existence than numbers, and so I think those have been things that have formed my relationship with the outdoors. And Boy Scouts, being able to, go through the wilderness with a map and compass and start a fire, cook your own food, make a shelter, tie knots, and basically survive in the outdoors. I think that's a lost art, and
Mhm.
I think a lot of people are going away from those kinds of skill sets. And, you know, looking back, those are some of my most fond memories, is just spending time around a fire with my buddies in Boy Scouts, going on the trips, going on the hikes and stuff like that. And I just wish everyone had that experience growing up, so that they could, because like to this day, I go out camping probably 3 or 4 times a month. I have to get out. I have to get out and be under the stars. I can't be in the construct all the time. And and I think that's important. If you're going to have the mentality of defending the earth, if you're going to put yourself on the line to defend the planet, which gives us life anyways. There's lots of utilitarian reasons to do that too. But also, if you love it, it's easier to put yourself on the line and to defend it. So I think that's just super important. So it's funny because I've kind of come full circle in my work. I'm kind of almost creating like an adult Boy Scout program. Well, not even Boy Scout, right? It's like um, People Scout, I guess. It's just like
It's Scouting of America now.
Right.
yeah.
They
Yeah.
dropped the boy. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
they did. Okay, good,
Yeah, yeah.
good. I know they've had problems and all kinds of stuff, and I don't think people do it as much. But anyway, yeah, I mean that's what I'm trying to do. It's almost like that, it's like, hey, we got to learn these skills, because I think there's a lot of reasons for that. From the sustainability aspect to the stuff that we're talking about. Like being able to um, defend it.
Mhm.
Um,
Nice. Well, it seems like scouting, that background sets you right up for a bioregional approach, because you are, as a young person, learning the plants and animals that are nearby. So what I find really interesting is the number of people who don't get the bioregional approach. And you've got to have opinions about that, I would think. It's like, why don't people understand this?
yeah, I do have thoughts on that. I think um, I mean, I don't know if you guys know Antonio Gramsci. Uh, if you in social science, they talk about his work quite a bit. He was an Italian guy in the World War II era, but he wrote about what he called the cultural hegemony.
Mm.
The ruling class wants things to be a certain way that benefit them. So literally, our ideologies, and then their ideology becomes the norm, right?
Right.
And they do that through these ideological apparatuses like education, the media, the political parties, church, families. These are all institutions that perpetuate ideologies that benefit the ruling class. And so, I don't think the ruling class really wants there to be this focus on localism, because global trade is where a lot of profit is made, right? Because you can exploit low wages in other parts of the world and things like that. And so there's this, also you could call it the neoliberal hegemony. That's a more modern term, that this growth economic system is an imperative. It's almost like, and I talk to a lot of people who are pretty far left leaning or sort of anti-capitalist, but it's like they still won't question those fundamentals. It's almost like taboo to question those fundamentals, right?
Mhm.
And so that's the reason. I mean, I think it's like ingrained into us, kind of like patriarchy is, and other ideological thoughts. It's almost just like a second nature to us. He
So
called. Go ahead. Sorry.
So for people who are new to this idea of bioregionalism, let's try and define it. How do you define a bioregion? How do people identify a bioregion?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's an important question. I think it's always going to be tricky, but the general rules, guidelines would be like watersheds, uh, common land features, flora and fauna, animals and plants, mountain ranges, So for example, in the Pacific Northwest, we have Cascadia, right? That's essentially British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon. And of course, you can divide up further into eco-regions. You have the coastal area, and you have the Cascades, and you have these valleys and stuff like that. So each of the, can be divided, but there is a kind of uniting point as well with that whole region, even Northern California, really, versus like the Mojave Desert, which can clearly be, there's transition areas and stuff like that. So again, it's complicated, but roughly speaking, the Joshua Tree. I actually made a bioregional flag for the Mojave Desert because that's where I lived for the last 20 some odd years. And I put the silhouette of the Joshua Tree on the center of it because it's kind of like the Douglas fir, I made the colors of the flag. What does it look like when the sun is setting? There's kind of like a band of colors. There's like a blue, kind of a white, and then like an orange in the lower on the ground. And so I made that kind of like the Cascadia flag. And so anyway, point is that those are some characteristics that are going to unite an area.
Nice. Nice.
You spoke a bit in your some of the things I've read on your websites about interest in how society makes decisions. The societal decision-making process. And it seems that right now it's the process is sort of captured, as you described, by the concepts of hegemony and different political parties are holding all the juice. What do you think about a way to change that? Is there a way to get into that process without pretty radical change? I almost felt that the bioregionalism was, sort of almost an anarchistic approach, that we need to decentralize and do things more naturally. So I've been thinking about how it is that you would try to put all this together.
Yeah, the American legal system, I would say it has some virtues, especially with its origins. It's maybe one of the first liberal democracies and all that kind of stuff. And it was a revolution, right? We're a revolutionary society, or we used to be anyways. And that was pretty amazing. But kind of caked into it was the ruling class, protections for them. I think it was James Madison in one of the Federalist Papers. He talked about, the law is there to protect the opulent minority, at least in part, right? We have, it's good that we have minority rights so that you don't have a tyranny of the majority and stuff like that. That's why we have freedom of speech and civil liberties, right? But at the same time, really, it's, I think, more than that, through the election system, and there's just a failure, I think, maybe inherently in representative democracy, but certainly when you have enormous amounts of wealth. I don't really care what kind of system it is. If you have people who have concentrated wealth, they're going to run things. That's just the way it is. So that's part of it, I think, unfortunately. And so I don't know that we can really peacefully change the laws of the United States without basically changing the entire system. That gets tricky, right? So one way I think that I look at the Kurdish people actually as a good example of maybe a way. In Syria, they have an autonomous region they call it Rojava. And they've earned that autonomy, probably not through super peaceful, I think you had the Islamic State go in there and they had to chase them out. And ever since then, they've just kind of been running their own thing locally. But they actually abandoned the pursuit of creating a state. But it's inspired by the works of Murray Bookchin, who was an American philosopher who wrote about these concepts of like ecofeminism, and he started out writing about anarchism. He had a book called Post-Scarcity Anarchism, right. But he kind of abandoned that sort of. It's definitely decentralized what he's talking about. He calls it a bottom-up system democracy. And that's what they've implemented in Rojava. So you have neighborhoods, cities, states, or like regions, and they call them cantons over there. So you have, I think there's 4 cantons in Rojava, and they'll at the top they will make policies that affect like international trade and defense and stuff like that. They'll coordinate more, but really it comes from the bottom. So there's the idea is to eliminate hierarchy, which I think that's what anarchy really means, just like no archy. Right? So they're trying to get rid of the hierarchy. And they did that without being the nation state.
Right.
So it's possible to kind of start being subversive, if you will, by just simply governing yourself. It becomes, I think, a problem when you have taxation that would take away resources that you could use to do that. But I think, it's a start. That's what I think is great about Cascadia as an idea. It's a start. We can start like buying food from the local farmer, those kinds of things. So I don't know, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It's sort of like creating what you're talking about, I think, is the concept of creating a new society within the old and seeing how far that type of system would go.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at a place like Ireland 100 years ago, they were a society within a society. And when they tried to play by the rules of the British, kind of like the Americans earlier, they would usually get their asses handed to them by the militaries. Then they started kind of taking a different approach. I'm Scottish and Irish, by the way, so I kind of think about my own ancestral ties and stuff like that, and see what they're. But they're their own people. They have their own language, and the thing about the Kurds and the Irish, if you're looking at those as just sort of recent history of people who have found their own sort of system, they're homogenous, right? It's all the same people. And, even in Ireland, you had differences between conservatives and leftists and religious types and non-religious. So there was still some conflict, but they all got together at the end of the day to have their own independent state. So in the United States, we're up against a lot of different obstacles, I think, as far as that goes. We're very individualistic here. We're very, it's a pluralistic society, lots of different folks, and they don't necessarily get together very well. And so I think they'll divide and conquer, right? That's where we are. And I think in America more than anywhere else we're divided by so many different ways. They've done that remarkable. And that's where I've actually, in Cascadia, I've seen people across kind of political spectrums even. They can agree. Like I have a group here that we do rucking. And I've had a couple of people who had like a "Don't Tread on Me" flag on their backpack or something like that. But then I talked to them about bioregionalism, and they were all on it. They were like, "Yeah, absolutely." So, I think if you can, it's an interesting thing because they probably still have a lot of things I would disagree with, but I think there's a way to build an identity. Build an identity around our bioregion, right? And maybe you can unite people around that better than I think you could ever hope to try to do it nationally. So problem is that takes a long time. Like, in Ireland or the Kurds, they have been a society for centuries. So I think that's one of the things we're up against. Like, I think I like to mentally think about this as a future model that we can work towards. It's a goal, it's something to be doing. And at the same time, what I'm trying to do with the community response group, which is based on bioregionalism, I've been writing about that on my website. The whole point of that is, how do you get people ready for responding to climate crises, climate breakdown? So it's kind of an effort at deep adaptation. So even if it doesn't change the outcome of the current system, can we expect that current system will become, it's already starting to kind of erode. And that's scary, very scary. But how can you start to build ideas and skill sets and things like that that can fill in the gaps, especially during that transition period, and maybe hopefully build a new way of thinking and resilient, sustainable communities.
Thanks.
And so to some extent, is that the purpose of the videos and the training programs you have, outdoor living? I mean, a lot of it seems to focus on the word collapse.
Yeah.
And so I had the impression that it's not only to, help people understand and enjoy the ecology around them, but also to provide skills, given if not the fact, the concern that existing society may begin to collapse at some point in time.
Yeah. Professor Jem Bendel, who's British guy, wrote Deep Adaptation, and he wrote a book recently called Breaking Together.
Yeah.
Yes.
In that recent book, if you've read it or check it out, it's free. Actually, you can get it on his website. He says that collapse it's a process. It's already started maybe 10 years ago or something like that.
Yes.
And so, yeah, that's one way to look at it. And for anyone who doesn't want to think about collapse, and I can understand that, but that's the thing about this. This is good no matter whether you believe collapse is real or not. This is good stuff for so many reasons. We got to change, and this is a way to do that. But I do fundamentally believe we're headed towards that, because I don't think the nations of the world, certainly not the United States and other Western nations that have the power to change, are going to. They're it's like a double bind. If you start becoming too sustainable, then you're going to become weak militarily. It's about control and domination and everyone's fear of each other. So it's like, no, we have to keep the economy going so that we can have the best military, so that we can whip everyone's ass and control the world. Like that's where we are, right? And I guess I can't even really say they're wrong about that. Like maybe it would be disaster, but at the same time, if we destroy the planet, then there's not going to be anything left to save or fight over anyway. So
Exactly.
it's a double bind. No matter what we do, it's going to be bad. And so having these skills, being able to do mutual aid, where we are growing food, helping each other. And that's the difference between this and like the prepper community on the right, who often are very individualistic, narcissistic, and egotistical, macho shit,
Right.
This is men and women working together. And I have some thoughts about that too, if you want to get into it, but there's this sort of concept of how you go about doing conflict resolution that the Kurds have done, how you get men and women working together, because there's cults, right? That communes and cults and different groups that have tried to do sustainable living away from society, and a lot of times here, especially, it turns out a charismatic leader winds up driving the Rolls Royce and screwing all the young women, and it's a disaster, right? 20% of people do 80% of the work. It's I've heard all kinds of stories about that.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. It's pretty accurate. You said something really important, which is that no matter what we do, it's going to be bad. So we're kind of stuck with a trolley car problem in essence, right? And we have a speed versus impact problem, which is that the speed of the collapse is accelerating and the impact is accelerating. And because we have so many different points of view in the world, right? It seems like we can't even agree on the actual problem, let alone agree on the symptoms, right? People are still in denial of climate collapse. And that's not even the problem. That's the symptom of the larger problem of the way we interact with our brothers and sisters in the world and with the living environment and all of our cousins, as you said. And it seems to me like, we're the beauty of bringing in your Boy Scout stuff with the collapse curriculum, in essence, is that you're teaching people a new way of thinking. And that might be a very subversive and subtle way to kind of, change their orienteering, their map making, their sense making, and maybe their worldviews, and doing that, driving a kind of an ecological empathy with that bioregionalism, as you said, could bind us all together, regardless of race, creed, color, religion, development, whatever. I'm curious then, in that standpoint, who is who is collapsed curriculum best targeted to? Because the three of us other guys on here with a little bit of facial hair and some gray, more. I think sitting here, we're on the downside of the hill a little bit, right? And we're working our butts off to make an impact. But really, the younger people and life itself, as we talked about, is the real target. So how would you say the collapsed curriculum could best be shared, and how would we propose to share that with people our age who might be more informed about what's going on, but yet not really the ones that are going to have the impact?
Well, a lot of older dudes. I'm 45, so I have a gray beard too. I actually kind of try to, because I would just have a gray beard, but it's like I look like a skunk. It's like white here, white here, white here, and then so I have to kind of even it out. Anyway,
Nice.
but a lot of old dudes know stuff about the environment. They know stuff about these skills because we used to go outside when we were kids.
Hmm.
I was alive before the internet, before all these devices that we get attached to.
Right.
And I think that's part of the problem. Like my brother, I have a daughter who's 18, and my brother has one has 3 kids. Actually, 2 of them have 3 kids, and one has 2. They're just spend so much time looking at their screens.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to go outside. It's hard to get them to go outside to do stuff. So folks my age and older, we are more likely to have spent time outdoors. And to address one thing too here, I mean, one of the problems is you're talking about the masses. It's going to be very difficult for us to make a huge impact on the masses. And this is the thing about like nonviolent resistance, is it almost requires like a critical mass of people to do something, right?
Right.
And that's one of the challenges that we're up against, because I don't know that we're going to obtain that. So I think we have to, for now, definitely try to find the low-hanging fruit, find people who want to kind of think this way, are more on the cusp.
Mm-hmm.
We can't waste our time on everyone right yet. I think as things start to deteriorate more, then more people will all of a sudden become interested in these things. And I think since like maybe the pandemic, there's been a shift already. There's people living in tiny homes or doing van life, gardening, eating organic foods and stuff like that. So, there's some transition, but there's a long way to go. So I think, for older guys, ladies too, I have actually a lot of ladies in my group that are older. There's a lady that I hike with twice a week who's 70. And so she is interested. Her daughter lives in Portland, and she already does this stuff. So I think she kind of was already familiar to some degree. Apparently up in Portland, they call her the general. She's a really tough broad.
All right.
And they do rucking, and they do serious drills and stuff like that, training and all that kind of stuff. But her mother, who's 70, is she even had an injury on her leg and stuff like that. But she saw the group, saw what we were about, joined, and so I started a ruck club. Essentially, it's a Cascadia community response group and ruck club. And so the ruck club is just to get people in the door who they see what we're about. Like, oh, they go on hikes with backpacks with weight in it. And so I think that's something that I would advocate for getting started with, like a group locally where you are. Even if you only do because like level 1 rucking is on a flat surface. You do it for about an hour. The goal there is to get to 30 pounds of weight on your back to be able to do, 4 miles in an hour. And I was able to do that the other day on a flat cement surface. And some folks are obviously like doing it more like they're walking more like 2 miles an hour or 3 miles an hour. But they're increasing their ability to do this. Even the lady who's 70 years old. And we're building community doing it. We're getting together. We're talking about ideas. Sometimes we take it slower. We talk about, look, this is Camas. The Native Americans in this area, the Native people would take the route, and they would dry it out, grind it up, make it into a flour, and make a pancake out of it. That's a food. That plant, it's a pretty flower, but it's also a food. So is the cattails here along the river. Same thing with the roots. You can make a flour out of them. So as we're hiking and conditioning ourselves potentially for, let's say, in a natural disaster, if you needed to go on a supply run and there's a shortage of gasoline, you might have to hoof it, right? So being able to carry weight on your back is good. It's good. And they say, there's another guy that I'm hiking with who is a little older than me. He's a therapist too, but he was saying that, for example, they say that there's nothing more healthy for older people to do than to hike with a backpack, because it's things like your leg strength. It's like a overall strengthening activity.
Yeah.
It's good for your knees, it's good for your joints, it's good for your back and your core. The other one I heard was hanging from a pole, because your grip is something that you lose over time. So I think this activity, building community around it, is good for older people to do. That's like most of the people that have time that are interested seem to be older than me, not younger. And so that's a challenge. Like, how do you get the younger people to do this? But I'm still trying different ideas. There's another guy who's younger than me, who's involved in some like local mutual aid groups and stuff like that. And we're talking about trying to reach out to more people who are younger and do those kinds of things. But I think it takes time.
Cool.
So,
well, we spoke with Guy McPherson some time ago. Do you know that name, Guy McPherson?
Yeah, I follow him
and he's a big advocate for practical skill training, and he bemoans the fact that in our educational system we don't do that. It's too academic. But there's also, I see a need for some kind of psychological training, because we're about to be hit with this coming storm that's going to pull the rug right out from under us, and the dominant experience is going to be stress, and it's going to be different for different people depending on where they live, what their circumstances are. So how do we prepare people for that tidal wave of ambiguity that they're about to experience?
Yeah, we live in a society already that is riddled with depression and anxiety and stress, and lots of people are going to therapy. It's a booming industry.
Yeah.
Even men, which have been more reluctant to do therapy over the years, are starting to increasingly do so. And there's a shortage of male therapists out there, unfortunately, and I think that's who, if men are going to go to therapy, they like to go see a man. A lot of times, this is just a broad generalization, but especially veterans and things like that have PTSD. But actually, this guy that I ruck with, who's a therapist, we have long conversations about this very topic, which is cool. See, we go on a hike together. We just did on Saturday. We went up to the summit near Eugene, and the whole time we were talking about this stuff, the psychological stuff, and I actually came across a program that I can send y'all a link to, and it's a free 75-minute thing about building resilience as a person. I think it's called Resilience for Liberation. And the concept is there's nothing wrong with you, actually. It's the society that's making us nuts, right?
Yep.
So I think there's like an intersection here of, you can talk to people about how nuts things are and how nuts society makes us, and then we can talk about why. Why does society make us nuts? Why does it make us so anxious? But you're right, and it's going to get worse, right? And I think those are possibly good things for society to have breaking points in order to change. Like you have to hit rock bottom, as they say in the recovery culture, before you can accept your reality, accept that you're powerless or whatever. So I think that's something, I haven't talked about that a lot, but I think that would be a good thing to have in the collapse curriculum, is talking about how we get ready for, you know, increasing
The
anxiety,
unknown.
stress.
Yeah, it's this going to be this radical encounter with the unknown, and not very many of us are prepared for that.
And part of it right now, I mean, going into it, if for us that are sort of aware of what's happening, is, you know, I think on an individual level, embracing the unknown. We were talking about that on Saturday. Like, we can't, obviously we can't do anything. We can't control the outcome. We can't control the future. Like the Serenity Prayer says, you know, give me the strength to, what is it? The wisdom to
Know
that go.
Yeah.
I forgot it. Yeah, it's like, know that you can't change everything. Essentially, there's things that you don't have power over, that you don't control, and just embracing that and accepting the reality of it, and then the unknown.
Yeah, and I think there's in psychology, there's a really strong point to differentiate for people between accepting that something is true and real and is happening versus accepting it and allowing it to be what you accept, right? In other words, so I can accept that climate collapse is happening, and I can also accept that means that I don't want it to happen. I want to fight it in any way I can, in any of the number of ways that we might do it as human beings, right? Everything from the psychological to the physical. And so there's accepting the truth of something, but not accepting that you want it to be that way. Those are two different things.
So that's the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's the prayer. And so having that courage to change what you can change, do to participate in the way that you can, that's as important as the accepting what you can't change. So they go hand in hand. And I don't think, you know, there's a lot of people that haven't really thought about that, I don't think.
Well, we're used to expecting the world to be a particular way, right? Our culture teaches us the mother mind, you know, it teaches us to be the fish in water, as I think someone mentioned. And it's an extraordinarily difficult thing, like in the Matrix, being pulled out of the Matrix, right? It's like, what the hell just happened? And I think that's what people are looking around and they're terrified by it, right?
Oh, that is a great metaphor or analogy. The Matrix, I've always loved just the way they set that all up so wonderfully. You know, that time that Morpheus is walking with Neo, and he explains to him, look, these are regular people, they're teachers, they're firefighters, whatever, but most of them aren't ready to be unplugged, you know. And I think that's so true. Like, most of us aren't ready to be unplugged. It's hard for anyone. I don't care who you are, you know. It's because I grew up in it, expecting it to be a certain way, like you said. And so there's been a process of embracing, trying to separate myself from it. You know, it's really hard for most people just to simply be unplugged anyways, right? Because you'd either have to be independently wealthy or inherited a plot of land or something to be able to, for me, like, I would love to have a plot of land and grow some food and have some chickens and try to live off grid as much as possible. Maybe even have like a scout school out there on the land or something. But I mean, that's pretty tough to do. Like, I don't have the money to do that, to be honest. So I have to do what I can with what I have, and that's okay too.
Well, that's an important point. You know, what we try to do in activism as medicine is convince people to become active.
Right.
I mean, our whole premise is that activism is good for you. But the question of, I think you could call it scale, always comes up. When people say, I want to be active, you know, how can I be active, you know, at a certain scale or at a certain level? So some people, we think, you know, for me to be active is concern the climate, I need to join an international organization and do A, B, and C and get a certificate and get involved in the structure. And other people seem to be saying, you know, I need to focus on one thing. You know, we talked to Captain Paul Watson a couple of weeks ago, who's, you know, established Sea Shepherd. He's now got his own foundation, and his thing is pretty simple. He's going to go out to sea and try to save the whales. That's it.
Right.
I mean, and that, of course, is critical, dangerous, really important. It has a lot of things. So one of the questions that people, I think, struggle with is when I'm getting involved in climate activism, you know, where should I focus my attention? If someone came to you and said that in terms of scale, what would be your response?
No, that's a fantastic question and point. Like the fellow that has a boat, has the time and the money, or the means, I guess I would say, to go out there and stop people who are killing whales. Bless them, you know.
Mhm.
Awesome. I love it. You know, I was in Las Vegas for over 20 years, and I was involved in politics. So this question has come up for me a lot. Like, what should I be doing? And
Right.
Yeah.
I worked on campaigns for a while, thinking like, well, if we can get the right people elected. And then I realized, no matter who gets elected, you know, the people who have donated to them really get to say what happens
Mhm.
for the most part. And then I can speak to this from personal experience, unfortunately. And you know, like a lot of times they're good people and they want to do a difference, but they realize that they have to play this game. They have to give these people what they want if they're going to do anything. Because if you don't give these people what they want, you're out. Right. So that I had to go through that process to realize that getting people elected, it's not a waste of time. And if people are doing that and that's what they want to do, good. We can always have better people and worse people, right? The current presidential election is, you know, no different to me, at least. It's not what I want, but there's certainly a better choice and a worse choice. Almost, you know, goes without saying. But that I just felt like that's not going to change the world. And you know, maybe that's a little naive to think I can change the world, but how can I be the most effective? Really, is the question.
Mhm.
So I started my own business. And I started helping groups instead of politicians. I started building websites, doing videos and social media and stuff like that for more grassroots organizations. I think that was good.
Mhm.
And then I started really getting into the filmmaking part. So I became a filmmaker. I made some documentaries about what was happening in the Mojave Desert. And in the process of doing that, I spent some time with pipe people who
Mhm.
were essentially protesting a water pipeline that was going to take water out of rural Nevada and bring it to Las Vegas to feed the growing city. Because Lake Mead is like 75% empty. It's a bad situation. But that pipeline sucking that groundwater was going to have an impact. They've already seen this happen, like the Owens Valley, the Paiute people there, and that's a horrible story there. And so there were people from Owens Valley that came to do the run, and so I learned a ton just being among those folks. They did, you know, ceremonies. They invited us to join in the ceremonies, and they talked. The way they talked about the land really taught me how to think about the land and about our ancestors and stuff like
Mm.
that. So I really changed my thinking. And you know, so anyway, I've been making some films. I don't know how effective that has been, but it definitely has helped get the word out about things. That's actually where I met Max Wilbert, who's I think y'all talked to before. I met him on that particular filmmaking thing, and you know, learned about Thacker Pass and some of the work that they were doing there, and that's all local stuff.
Right.
So what if, you know, if someone was asking me like, well, what should I do? You know, I think you have to look at what your skill sets are. Like for me, it was filmmaking and other, you know, online stuff, writing. Um, I do think it's good to be local. There's nothing wrong with talking about bigger issues as well. But, you know, again, find out what your skill sets are and find out where that's going to be applicable the best. Like I'm not probably going to be able to fly down to Brazil and talk about the rainforest with my filmmaking, my abilities, my skill set. I can talk about what's happening in the Mojave Desert. I can talk about you know, the development that's happening down there. It's millions of acres are just being like bulldozed down there. It's incredible. And then, you know, getting involved wherever, like if you're an organizer, if you're good at making events, or if you're good at getting people to show up, things like that, just plug yourself in. The other thing I would say is like, you got to connect with, that's why I brought up Max Wilbert. You got to connect with people who are thinking like-minded.
Mhm.
And that's the toughest part, I think. So that's why sorry, I've been shaking the table here. Trying to get more connections with people on the ground rather than just online. But this is good too. I mean, not to say that we shouldn't have more Zoom calls and meet with people that are maybe a couple hours away or whatever. But definitely connecting with people who think like this, who are trying to do something, who are trying to make a difference. You got to connect with those folks and figure out where you can plug yourself in. That would be my answer to your question. Or if someone was coming to me like, what should I do? That's exactly what I would suggest.
Good, thank you.
Nice. Yeah.
You know, I would like to circle back to your experience with the law and philosophy. I have an interest in ecocide law and the rights of nature movement.
Mm-hmm.
And where do you see that going? And is that going to have any kind of juice?
My immediate answer would be probably not.
Ooh.
But
Okay.
as much as I would love it to, I'll give you an example. You know, it's in Ohio, there was a town that decided, I think they voted to protect at least a part of the lake, is it Lake Erie maybe? To give it recognition in the law as having rights. Well, I think the federal court came in and said, you can't do that. 14th Amendment.
That also happened, I think, in Florida and now in Utah. They're banning rights of nature explicitly. So you can't do that. Amazing.
Because property rights are protected by the Constitution. And that's been broadly interpreted. I've seen cases where county commissions and state legislatures, like in Nevada, they passed a law changing the zoning around a national conservation area, Red Rock National Conservation Area. They didn't. There was a developer, Jim Rhodes, who wanted to build a large upscale development right outside of this national conservation area. Well, he bought a bunch of land that was zoned for rural development. Well, then the county commission and the state legislature both passed regulations saying that zoning couldn't be changed after he bought the property. So he sued them, and the court ruled that was a taking, essentially, that was against his 14th Amendment right to, due process of law, essentially. Like, that was a taking. Because essentially he's at a loss. He bought that property at a price that could be zoned, that could be developed in a rural, it's like so many buildings per so much acreage or whatever. Well, he bought that as an investment to then change the zoning and expand the density, and that's where the profit was going to be made. So essentially, the laws that were passed to prevent that from happening cost him money, according to I think it was the Ninth Circuit judge that ruled that. I'm not sure if that was ever appealed, because I think the county and the state didn't want to have the consequence. I think they settled it with him somehow. They're like, okay, well, you can go ahead and build this, but they made some kind of agreement about how he would do it. So I don't think it was ever completely litigated all the way up to like the Supreme Court. But if that guy, I actually met the judge who made that ruling. I think he was a BYU grad. I think he was probably a Bush appointee. And knowing the Supreme Court, I mean, I'm guessing they would have decided the same way. I don't know. I could be wrong. But in our culture, in our law, our legal system is designed to protect the property owner, not the environment. So if it affects anyone's property rights, my guess is it's out the window, unless you can pass an amendment to the Constitution. And considering who runs things, very doubtful that that's going to be the case. That's my honest analysis, but anything can happen. You know, if you get enough people in a uproar about it. But again, that's the critical mass theory of change. You know, like the banning of alcohol in the early part of the century, 20th
Prohibition.
century.
Yeah.
Prohibition.
It seems like one of the great challenges of what we're, collapse that we're looking at is that the legal system, the social system, the emotional system, even the nervous system of the body isn't designed to encounter that level of a crisis, that level of a meta crisis, of a predicament, right? Problems we can solve because we're humans, we solve problems, but predicaments, there's just nothing in it's sort of like an alien that's, 100 feet tall and, can jump 4,000 miles in one leap. It's like, we just don't know how to encounter something like that.
Yeah, I actually think if you go into the biology of it, people have written about this, that a group of 150 people, 100 to 150 people, something like that, they can make a reasonable decision. They can deliberate. They can know each other. It's like kind of like the maximum number of people that can actually know each other and actually work together. So we have this machine that is way bigger than that, obviously. I don't think our biology is built to have a machine like this. And that's where I think the discussion about localism and bioregionalism is important, because that's where we can actually do things. The problem is, like, strategically speaking, that's not as good, not as effective. I think, like, if it's kind of like the Borg, or if you're familiar with the Star Trek, like the hive mind, and that huge machine that just acts as one unit. It's hard to beat that. It really is.
Resistance is futile. You will be assimilated.
You'll be assimilated. Yeah.
And they were right. We're all assimilated, and resistance is futile. But I think that even if that is the case, that we can't control that. But that thing is the big weakness of that machine is that it's not sustainable. So in the short term, it's hard to beat, but in the long term, it's going to destroy itself. So I don't know. So I think the answer then is the one thing that can defeat it. Like, if you go back to the Kurdish people, that bottom-up system of democracy, the power literally originated from the people, like it's supposed to in the United States, which I really think that was more of an idea than a reality, that the power originates from the people. It's a great idea. But how can it originate from the people if the people are so easily manipulated and really don't have any power to change anything, like by a vote? They have to vote in people who require enormous amounts of money to be elected. And so they have to take money from people who have a lot of money. It's not going to work. But with the Kurdish people, they have neighborhoods first. That's the first base of the society. And in every neighborhood, in every village and community, like, every person serves in the militia that's of a certain age, I think, men and women. They have all female units in their militias, so they can defend their village. And then they can, also work together with people in the region. When the Islamic State came in the last few years, it's kind of funny. One of the things that the Islamic State, the men in those units that were coming in trying to take over, they were most afraid to be killed by a woman, because if you get killed by a woman, apparently you don't go to heaven. So these all women Kurdish militia units that was like the biggest fear, is seeing those women come over the hill and stuff like that. So there's a lot of great stories I read about those situations. But coming back around to the point, like, I think that is a powerful way to organize society in such a way where the power is retained by the people, like the 9th Amendment says, and the 10th Amendment says. The power originates from the people, and anything that's not granted is reserved by the people. Like that. That's the idea here, but it's not the reality. And so when you can get together with your neighbors and you vote on local regulations, and then you pass up your vote to the regional and higher, then your voice is actually heard.
Right.
That you can actually change things. You don't have to wait for the political party to get on board with it, which they never will. So.
Yeah, it seems then that bioregionalism goes together with localism, which goes together with the collapsed curriculum. They all seem to be part of a singular kind of movement possibility.
Yeah, after I met Max Wilbur, I met another guy in Las Vegas. And I actually did a podcast with him. His name's Caleb. He's a great guy. I consider him my mentor. He had been doing this since he was 18. He's been up in Cascadia trying to do this kind of work for a long time. He is like a master of outdoor skills, and he taught me a lot of the skill sets that I've had. I did several trainings with him where we brought people in and had like a week-long camp and stuff like that, and I really learned a lot of this stuff, the synchronicity of all this stuff from him. He already figured it out, so I'm kind of one of his, I guess, disciples, if you will. But he already kind of figured out that bioregionalism goes hand in hand with sustainability, with preparing for what's probably going to happen. A good example that I brought up in one of my articles was in Ukraine, as the Russians came in and invaded. There were refugees trying to leave Ukraine, and it's hard to get out of the country. It's a long distance, and so there's this thing called the Green Road. It's eco villages essentially that are in Ukraine, kind of going away from the center out towards the borders. And these are folks that have been doing organic permaculture stuff and trying to build a new way of resilient and sustainable living. And so when the war broke out, a lot of these refugees wound up going to those eco villages, and they had the food, they had the knowledge to take care of these people, the space to take care of these people. And so there's a intersection between preparedness, between sustainability, between farming and doing these local sustainable practices, and our response to whether it's climate collapse or just overall ecological collapse. Like Jem Bendel, I think he's in Indonesia maybe, doing a farm school.
Yes.
To help local people growing food. I think growing food is probably like literally the course, maybe the center of all of this I'm talking about.
Well, the interesting thing about Jem Bendel is that his data shows that even if society did convert rapidly to alternative forms of energy, it's not going to be enough. And it's not going to solve the problem given the depth of the problem. So I think that's why he's focusing on, the next step, so to speak. I mean, the concern that he's had about deep adaptation. And it's just now even intensified to where I'm not certain he wants to travel around the world giving lectures at this point, but perhaps focus his energy in doing something different and more practical. So you have to commend the guy. He's made an important decision.
Left a tenured position to go do that.
Yep.
Someone was trying to suggest he was like in it for the money, and I was like, "You kidding me? Like, if he was in it for the money, so many better things he could do. Like this is the worst thing he could possibly have done."
No.
Oh boy.
He seems like a great guy. I really enjoy his writing too, and it's been pretty influential on me to put the framework together.
Nice. Well, we're coming up on an hour here. One question we often ask is, what is your trajectory? What do you see coming up for you personally in the coming months and years?
Good question.
a very minor question, you know, it can just.
Tip of your tongue.
Yeah.
I'm working on myself to right now a lot. I think the rucking has been good. I kind of gained some weight over the last few years. My wife is doing school, and it's been very stressful for her, and so you know, we've been moving and all this stuff. We moved from Las Vegas to up here to Oregon, so I'm trying to get kind of straighten that up. And this rucking program is part of it. But I've also been trying to go to the farmers market, buy local food and stuff like that. So I'm working on myself, trying to improve my condition, and just trying to take it day by day on that front. I want to finish this series that I'm doing with the collapse curriculum. I want to have a book. I'd love to have like a guide, basically a guide to how to build your bioregional group and what to train. So my idea is like not to train the individuals, but to train the people who will train the people locally, you know. So when we had a camp in the Mojave Desert, we had some people come out, and that's what they're doing, is basically getting like a certification to teach. So they came out to learn how to teach these skills. And so I want to kind of make a manual essentially that will help people who want to try to do this. And thanks for having me on here too, because it's great to get the word out to people who probably aren't aware of this. Like that's one of the hard things about it, obviously, is that I got 400 subscribers on Substack and I got 4,000 followers on Twitter, but you know, I think most of those people don't even see my posts. Every once in a while something hits, but it's, I don't know if the reach is very good. I'd love to get more reach. So I need to learn more about that, I guess, just so I can I'm not trying to like be viral, but certainly connect with the people who would be benefiting from this or would be interested in this. And I think maybe getting the book out there, finishing that. So I think in the next year or so, I can have that book finished and maybe continue writing. And I'm part of this bioregional community response group is to have in-person classes. So I haven't really done that yet, other than the rucking, but I'd love to have like classes in person that people can come to. So those are the things that I'm projecting and trying to work towards in the next couple of years. I'd say my wife will probably be doing her PhD here for the next 3 or 4 years. So after that, who knows, we might move, but enjoy being in Cascadia while I can and do some fun stuff too, because you gotta have fun. You gotta get out there and enjoy the outdoors as well.
Nice. Nice. John, J-Lo, do you have any final thoughts or questions?
I just wanted to thank you for coming. It's been a really enjoyable experience for us. One of the things that we learned by doing this is all the different ways that people look at what I think we all look at the same predicament, but we all look at it in a different way. And hearing from you has been, for me, very helpful. And I think our viewers will enjoy it also. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll double tap on that. I totally double tap on that. This has really been a different kind of conversation. I really appreciate that, especially with what we're looking at right now. So thank you very much for your time and really support the idea of your book too. I think that could be a huge impact out there.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll keep working on it.
Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks. And we'll be in touch on all the details and that kind of thing, and maybe some future conversations as well. So
that'd be good.
Awesome.
Thanks again.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Cheers. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation today. If you'd like to know more about activism as medicine, you can simply visit our website, activismismedicine.net. See you next time.